This is Dr. James Crosby, Head of Sustainability at Advantage Utilities. I'd like to ask, could your organisation be more of an energy sector hero? Are you interested in improving your sustainability as a business? Well, now you can obtain the expert view and guidance on renewable energy solutions, on-site generation, carbon accounting, and sophisticated grid energy purchasing options through Advantage Utilities. Our team of experts use the latest tools to better analyze, track, and reduce your organization's energy usage and carbon emissions. To find out how Advantage Utilities can become your one-stop shop for all your energy and sustainability needs, please visit www.advantageutilities.com or give one of our passionate and friendly team a call on 0208 131 4747.
Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Andy Brooks. Andy is the Director of New Ventures at North Sea Transition Authority. I'm quite excited about that, actually. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, Michelle. Delighted to be here. I'm quite humbled, actually, when I look at who else has been part of the podcast. So I'm really pleased to be here. Yeah, so I'm Andy Brooks, as you say. I'm the Director of New Ventures at the North Sea Transition Authority. Been around the oil and gas industry for the last 20 or so years, mainly with operators such as BP, CNR, Chevron, a couple of others. So yeah, joined the NSTA in September 2020 as Central North Sea Area Manager, and then have been Director of New Ventures since January of last year. And I'm a chemical engineer by degree, a long time ago from Leeds Uni.
Excellent. So how did you get started in the energy sector?
Well, I think it goes back to the choices I made before I went to university. I wanted to do something. I think I was one of those people that didn't really know where I wanted to be when I grew up, but I wanted to do something that would open doors and allow me to go a number of different directions, and engineering of any discipline, actually. I mean, obviously I'm biased and I think chemical engineering is the best, but any engineering or any STEM related subject, I think, really opens doors. So when I got to uni and I realized that it was something that I was interested in and passionate about, at that time, the oil and gas industry was recruiting a lot out of universities from chemical engineering. And so that kind of piqued it. And I was very lucky enough to get sponsored by BP towards the end of my degree. And then I got a graduate job with them. So I moved up to Aberdeen straight out of uni, and have not really looked back since.
Okay. So was it quite a big move for you then to move up to Aberdeen from Leeds at quite a young age?
Yeah, I think so. I'd been up here on a summer placement, and I mean, I'm from Birmingham, so I'd moved from Birmingham to Leeds, and I just keep moving further north. I don't know if I'll ever end up in Shetland or anywhere like that, but yeah, it was a big move. But I think at the time, I guess if I look at, I think we're of that generation where our parents, or a lot of our parents, had worked for maybe one or two companies throughout their career and had a long career. So I think at that time, the oil and gas industry was one of those that looked like it was if you worked for a big super major, you'd be there for a long time, and you'd sort of emulate what some of our parents did. It's not quite worked out like that for me, but that was the pull to go and work in an industry that would give you that longevity. But yeah, it was a big move. I came up here on my own, but obviously Aberdeen's it's a big place for graduates from all across the industry, so it doesn't take long to make friends, thankfully.
I think so too, actually. So who was your role model as a young graduate? Why did you find them inspirational?
I think, to be honest, I had a few. When I first joined BP, there's so many. I think you look at the people that you're being led by or you interact with, and I had some very good advice across the place. My first boss, a lady called Dawn Williamson, was excellent, actually, another process engineer, and really challenged you to bring the best out of yourself. But actually, I think some of the people that you met that gave you those little bits of advice to make when you're a young graduate and you're in meetings, there's a lot of times where you're not really having an input into those meetings, and you might be sitting and doing a lot of listening, which is, in hour-long meetings where you perhaps don't understand what's going on, can be difficult. But what one of the mentors I had very early told me to sit and watch people's behaviors and see the bits of people's behaviors that you liked and bits that perhaps you didn't like, and then you can mold your own style to the things that appeal most, and and obviously away from those that don't. So I think there was a number of people early in my career who influenced that, and then later on probably even more so when people give you the opportunity to step up and become in a more influential role.
So going back to that, I was going to ask you, it is difficult for a new graduate to sit in an hour's meeting when they might not have much input into it. What advice would you give them if anybody find themselves in that situation?
I think you have to be a sponge, I think, when you're new, and you just have to take every opportunity that you can. And so that's what I mean by, you may not have input into the conversation necessarily, but you can always learn something from every situation that you're in, and you can look at how people lead meetings, how people interact in meetings, how people chair meetings, or how they bring people in and how they include people in the different conversations. There's plenty of different characters across different ways of thinking that perhaps they're quieter in meetings, but you want their input. So I think whether you're a graduate, or I think we can all learn when you're sitting in sessions where perhaps you've not got as much input as you would either like or not. But I think with graduates, you tended to be invited to things to listen, but you've got to make the most of it. And that's what I always trying to do, is look at how other people are interacting and what I felt aligned with the way I would like to lead or certainly be treated. In
your opinion, what makes a great leader then?
I think great leaders can come from lots of different perspectives. I think, I feel like I'm quite a trusting leader. I like to back my team and allow them to go and spread their wings, but knowing that they've got the protection that I'm there to back them up. If you want people not to be afraid of making mistakes, but equally you don't want them to make silly mistakes, or you certainly don't want them to make the same mistakes twice. But I think it's very difficult to say exactly what makes a good leader, because I think different people see different things in different leaders. So I think it's one of the things I think makes a great leader is being quite self-aware and understanding how you naturally lead, and being able to tweak and adapt that to different situations, just to try and get the best out of people, because everyone's different, obviously.
What is the most challenging thing about your current role?
To be honest, I don't see too much as challenging. I genuinely love working for the company that I work for. I joined them, as I said, about 2 years ago, because I felt I was at that point in my career where working for a pure oil and gas operator, and having worked in the industry that had given me and my family so much, and family is very important to me, I wanted to be in a place where we can genuinely say that we are trying to make a difference and trying to direct the industry in the direction that it needs to go. And so the role that I have now, yes, there are challenges within my role. It includes oil and gas licensing, it includes carbon storage licensing, it includes the integration of new technology, integration of oil and gas with wind, bringing in hydrogen. So even just saying all those things, there's huge complication in that. But I think genuinely, if I enjoy every day trying to influence and help people understand the direction that they need to go. And yeah, every day is different, and that's what's challenging, but also what's very rewarding.
But that would be quite challenging to try and take the not even try to take the oil industry and change it into so we can reach our net zero.
Yeah, it is a challenge, and I think we all recognise that. I think we as regulators recognise it. I think the industry recognises it. Certainly, society recognises it. But I think there's general recognition that we need to do differently. Every metric talks about how oil and gas is going to be extremely important for decades to come, but we have to do it differently. We can't produce oil and gas in the same way that we've done it in the past, i.e., completely unabated without pushing emissions reduction. And that's really what we're focused on is trying to reduce emissions. And we've done pretty well. We've reduced emissions from flaring and venting over the last 3 or 4 years from the 2018 benchmark. But now we're at that sort of critical juncture where we've probably done the more simple stuff. So the stuff that doesn't necessarily need large investment. So making things more efficient, which invariably reduces emissions, improving just facility uptime and all that and all that sort of stuff. And now we're really at the point where to make a real inroads, you have to start tackling emissions from power generation, which accounts for about 3/4 of all the emissions from offshore infrastructure. And that's where it becomes more complicated because you're now talking about potential electrification or power from offshore wind or power from shore. And it is complicated. But generally, I think there is a direction that everyone agrees we need to go in, and we just need to continue to push to get there. We have the North Sea transition deal as well, which was signed between government and industry to make commitments to reach net zero by 2050, and currently we are making progress towards that.
But what do you see as the key challenges in reaching that, though?
There's a few. I think certainly we believe that electrification is key. And there's certainly some hurdles. You may hear a lot of people talk around grid, access to grid, and being able to electrify platforms and getting access to the grid, which is a challenge. And supply chain is certainly a challenge in terms of having enough cables, having enough mooring lines, having enough structures to be able to build offshore wind and connect that to oil and gas platforms. In actual fact, the brownfield modifications to allow for electrification is not easy either. I'm sure you know, with your background, offshore, doing anything offshore brownfield is extremely challenging and difficult. And so to try and change out your power generation completely and electrify is challenging. So I think there's a number. However, I think we owe it to ourselves as an industry, and we are duty bound as a regulator to keep pushing for what we believe is right to reach those net zero targets.
Excellent. Because you've only been in your current role for an extremely short time. Is it a lot different to what you were doing, maybe in working for an operator?
It's really interesting. When the Oil and Gas Authority was set up, that was our previous name before we changed it a year or so ago. It was basically set up as kind of a mirror operator. So it was, if you looked at our structure in terms, we had an operations directorate with area managers or asset managers. So from that perspective, when you join, it's a relatively familiar setup because you can see you've got subsurface people and facilities engineers and sitting within groups that manage areas of the North Sea. So that bit's relatively easy. The bit that you have to get used to is the regulatory side of things and understanding the regulatory powers that we have, where we have powers to regulate and where we have slightly different powers to try and influence and promote. But that's what I really enjoy about it. What I think we're a great example of a regulator that can take the great parts of people who have been career civil service and great parts of people who've got huge amounts of experience within industry and really merge them together and be a really collaborative regulator, which I think we are pretty well renowned for. But also, we need to, the operators and industry need to have the respect that we are a regulator, and there will be times where we may need to be in conflict with industry, because that's what we are there to do, because we're there to regulate as well as collaborate and influence.
So there's a big difference then.
It's not huge, but it takes a bit of getting used to. I think it's one of those, when you first join, you're a little bit worried about tripping over yourself and maybe saying the wrong thing when you're out talking in industry. And I think, and actually, regardless of whether you're in a regulator, and as you move up in organizations, that people are watching you, the organization's watching you. And I think when the feeling that I get as now being a director in the regulator, it's not just the people within the organization that are watching you, but there are people externally who are watching you and how you behave and what you say. And that takes a little bit of getting used to. And it's probably similar if you're in an operator, but you've just got that slightly different angle to it, because there's that regulatory part of the role that we have.
Okay, so what would you say would be the most challenging thing about your current role then?
I think it's the pace of change is coming at us very quickly, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So even in the time that I've been in the organization, carbon storage, we had 6 carbon storage licenses when I joined. We now have 27 that we need to manage and drive towards, obviously going out and appraising and assessing those things. And the same in the petroleum area. We're in a security of supply requirement. We know that we need to reduce emissions. So the most challenging part is that everything's a priority. So the transition is a priority, energy security is a priority, emissions reduction is a priority, and it's balancing those things. But again, that's a challenge, but it also is what's exciting about it, because we know that we need to be able to balance these things. We are a relatively small organization, so we know we need to prioritize where we want to put our resources. But that's probably the biggest challenge, is that certainly in that sort of new ventures space, there's just a lot happening, and it's how do you work out where to prioritize your efforts.
Okay. Have you encountered any career disasters?
I wouldn't say career disasters. I think it's interesting, as I said at the beginning, when I first joined BP, I think if I looked at where I thought my career would go, in terms of, my dad he'd actually worked for British Telecom for 25 years. And whether or not it's because it was a 2-letter acronym that began with B, when I joined BP, I thought that was it. I was going to be there for 25 years. And I think the reality is that I probably didn't take advantage of the opportunities I had within BP at the time. But also, I think that I very quickly realized that actually there would be times where I wanted to take control of my career. And that's probably why I've moved around companies, because I've got to a stage with the companies where those companies don't necessarily align with where I want to go and what I want to do. So I wouldn't necessarily say I've had career disasters, but there has been, the times that I've moved have been very personal driven, where I felt that I've needed a change in order to further my career. And whether or not I've stayed slightly too long in different places, I'm not so sure. But I think it's important to recognize when you need to take control yourself, and when you need a change in order to drive your career forward. And ultimately, I've ended up probably where I thought I would do right back at the start. I probably put on my career development plan at BP that I wanted to be a director of operations or something. So in many respects, I've completed the game and I've got to where I wanted to go. So I wouldn't say there was ever a disaster. I think you have to learn from every experience that you have, whether that's positive or negative, and take it from there.
But do you really think that you need to maybe move companies to further your career?
No, I think every individual is different. I've got lots of friends who have stayed at BP ever since I've been there and have carved out extremely successful careers. I think it's personal. I certainly felt in the times that I've moved that it's been right for me. I moved from BP to a much smaller operator and got much more responsibility, not management responsibility, but technical responsibility when I moved. And then after 3 or 4 years in that organization, I felt I was ready to go back into a much bigger organization and have that influence and have that gravitas and confidence to be more valuable for them as an individual. But I think everyone's different. Everyone has different priorities, and ultimately sometimes you have to be selfish and reflect on what's best for you, and that could be staying and looking for a different career path within the same company, or it could be moving companies or indeed sectors and industries if that's what you want to do.
Okay. That's good advice, actually. But how do you know when you've maybe stayed in a company too long?
That's a really good question. I think in every time that I've moved, funnily enough, I think my wife will probably say that she knew that you can tell that I think you can't start becoming a little bit cynical. I think you can start to have conversations around where you or your role or anything's going. I don't necessarily think it's knowing when to move companies. I think it's knowing when you need to do something different to develop. So that could be that you've been in a role for 3 or 4 years and you need a change or another opportunity. For me, it tended to be that I got to the point where the companies that I was with that it was the right time for me to move. I've been very lucky with the companies that I've worked for, that when I've been there initially, I've got great development and I've had great managers who've really put trust and faith in me, and that ultimately is what's driven me, is that you want people to put the faith in you and you want people to trust you to do a good job. And if that's within a company or if that's moving companies, then I think people have to decide that on their own.
I think so too. But it can be quite scary, especially for newly qualified engineer to maybe change to a different company.
I agree.
They might
I
get
agree.
comfortable and they might not want to change. What advice would you give to them?
I would always say that, well, don't necessarily jump at the first opportunity. It's always very flattering when someone offers you something that you think is great, and it's not always the case. I've had some opportunities that I haven't taken up because it didn't feel right to me. But I've always been. I remember someone, I think it was at Chevron, gave me the advice that if someone tells you that you can do something, if someone ultimately offers you something and wants you to do it, they're putting that faith in you. They believe in you. And even if you don't necessarily believe in yourself, they obviously see something in you and they believe in you. And if you can get the right guidance around you to help you develop, then it makes that leap. You almost take that leap of faith, and you can do it safely if you have that kind of grouping around you. But generally, if someone wants you and wants to take you from one company to another, they're doing it because they believe in you and they see something in you, and you should have a lot of confidence in yourself to go and make the most of it.
But it is quite difficult to build up your confidence, especially when you're newly qualified.
It is, yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think, there's so many different ways you can get into the industry, whether that's through apprenticeships, whether that's through university. I often felt quite overwhelmed actually when I was going for jobs, because I'd worked for an operator and perhaps hadn't done a lot of that really detailed technical engineering work, whereas I knew people who had worked for design houses or engineering consultants who had done a lot more deeper engineering technical work. But you all bring something different to the table, right? So the path that you've chosen or the experience that you had is all positive, and you have to believe in yourself. And it is difficult to get experience, but all experience is useful. And again, if you've gone to an interview and you've you've been successful and someone is offering you something, they've done it because they believe in you. And I've always felt that I've always wanted to repay that when someone's done that to me. And that's certainly what I try and do when I'm recruiting or leading or managing someone, that I try and put that faith in them and make them feel that they've got that faith from me, that they can go and be the best versions of themselves.
That leads me on to nicely to another question. What do you look for when you're recruiting someone?
I think it depends on the level that you're at when you're recruiting and where you're doing. I think where I'm sitting now, quite often that you obviously there's a minimum requirement for any role that you have, but assuming that a lot of people or a number of people will get over that line, a lot of it's to do with fit and what you need within your team. And actually, I'm not suggesting that you want the same people within your team, because actually you want that diversity of thought. You don't want people all the same. So I think it depends on the time that you're recruiting. I've done a lot of expansion within the team, in my leadership team, actually going from 3 of us to 6 or 7. And I think each time I've probably looked for something slightly different depending on the previous building block that I've put in, because you want someone to come in and fit into that group, but obviously to be able to bring something slightly different at times. So I think it depends. A lot of it is to do with, how they are and their fit to the organization, I think, and their character.
Okay. Excellent advice, actually. What does a typical working week look for yourself?
Well, it really depends. So over the last few months, we've obviously been, well, in fact, the last 12 or 18 months, we've been running licensing rounds for both carbon storage and for oil and gas. So a lot of the work that we do, or the team does, and then it comes to me to take any decisions on whether we award those licenses. So that can be, so it can be reviewing documents. A lot of the work that I do now is very people based. Obviously, the new ventures side of it, or the technical side of it, is a lot of work with academia and getting out there and seeing what's going on. So Monday this week, for example, I was at the FlowWick opening, which is the floating offshore wind innovation centre in Aberdeen. They opened a new centre to look at de-risking offshore wind and dynamic cabling and things like that. So it's actually a lot of it sort of keeping ears to the ground and understanding what's coming, doing some horizon scanning within the team of what's coming next, what hydrogen might look like, what ammonia might look like, what geothermal or offshore storage of hydrogen might look like. So there's no real typical week, to be absolutely honest, and that's what makes it interesting and what makes it exciting.
So what's the most enjoyable thing that you like about your current role then?
I'm a very people person. I enjoy the leadership of people, and I enjoy helping people get the best out of themselves, and not just those that work directly for me, but the teams. Right? I like trying to operate the directorate as a bit of a family where everyone can kind of come and have an opinion, and it's safe to disagree, it's safe to challenge, but you do that role modeling the right behavior. So I think, to be honest, that's the most enjoyable part of my days and weeks, is just the interaction you have with other people and seeing people grow and develop and just being part of, as I say, that organization. I want to be able to say to my kids in the not too distant future that I was genuinely part of the change that the industry needed to do. And every day I feel like the teams are coming into our organization and trying to do the right thing. And that fills me with a lot of pride in the work that we do.
Sounds amazing, actually. Sounds amazing. So is there anything that you still want to achieve in your career then?
Yeah, I said earlier that I was joking with my boss that I'd completed the game because I'd got to where I originally said I wanted to. I don't know, to be honest. I think I'm one of these people that's quite competitive, that clearly there's more places for me to go, whether that's to be MD or a CEO of an organization in the future. I'd like to get to a point where I'm considered for something like that. But I think it's one of those, I can't remember when I read, but it's all about careers are a marathon, not a sprint. And I think another thing that when you look at graduates, sometimes they're too eager to climb or to get up to management levels too quickly. And I think if everyone just slows down, takes a step back, it is a long career, and I think careers are going to be longer and longer. So I'm not in any rush to do anything too dramatic in the distant future. But as I've said before, the reasons that I've moved have been because I felt that I can do more in other places, and if that opportunity comes, then I'm sure I'll consider it.
So, what advice would you give young graduates that want to climb the career ladder too quickly?
Well, some do, and some are very successful. And I think actually, if I was to talk to my younger self, I think I could have taken opportunities to do more groundwork earlier in my career, and not necessarily. Well, I could have taken more advantage of it. But I think if I was to give people advice, I think it's that, as I say, things will happen. People, if you are grounded in the work that you do and you believe in the direction that companies are going in, and you can find good coaches and good mentors who can advise you. And I've always been a really big advocate of using mentors as a sounding board, using coaches when you need it. I've used a whole heap of different coaches across my career because different coaches offer very different things. So I think it's just take a step back, take a breather. There's no rush. Things will happen to good people, I always like to think. And if you have the right support network around you, both from your line managers and from your mentors and from coaches, then things will happen. You need to work hard, and you need to put the groundwork in. But generally, I think good things will happen to those that put the effort in and show the right behaviors. I think behaviors are so important now in business, that some of the old-fashioned behaviors that perhaps that I can still remember when I started in my career just aren't acceptable anymore. I think behaviors and the way the how you do stuff is almost more important than the what you do and what you know. It's the how, I think, is becoming much more important nowadays.
Okay, do you really think that though?
I genuinely do. Yeah, I think it. I think I remember working for an organization where you looked at the leadership team, and you could probably say that a lot of those had got to where they were from being that kind of outwardly shouting red type person that you can see. But you would sit in meetings with them, and I remember some of these meetings where the meeting might be going pretty well and you feel like you're getting something out of it, and then the behaviors of senior leaders to shout and scream for no real reason, that you actually forget the positiveness from that meeting. All you can remember is the behaviors that that individual is showing. And I think across all industries, I think now that those kind of behaviors are just a bit archaic and they're just not acceptable. And I think that most people I don't think would accept it, and rightly so. And I think it's now we are looked at as leaders to be much more, well, just to show those behaviors that are much more acceptable across society, I think.
I agree as well. And I'm glad that it actually is that type of behaviour is being phased out. So I was going to ask you, what are you going to do? What are you currently doing to maybe prepare yourself to become a CEO in an organisation? I know it's maybe quite a far away.
Well, it could be, yeah. And I think, I go back to what I was saying before. So one of the things I did when I first took on this role, which was I genuinely felt very humbled when I was given the opportunity to become a director of this organization, and I want to repay that faith that Stuart, our chief exec, has put in me, and I feel like I'm doing that pretty well so far, which is good. So there's an element of you have to deliver within the role that I'm in. I think that's the main thing to get more comfortable about being a director, and you can do that just through the work that I'm doing. Obviously, I talk to some of the other more experienced directors to learn and things from them, which is great. Equally, I got an executive coach. I talked about coaching before. I got an executive coach. First time I've really worked with an executive coach to really think about the things that I'm doing well. I talked about the behaviors and stuff. I genuinely don't think there's anything very specific that I need to change or work on. But it was a really interesting time to work with that executive coach, just to learn in my own mind what I do well, actually get rid of some of the baggage that perhaps I felt that's been holding me back. And realize that everyone learns differently, everyone manages differently, and perhaps some of those things that you think are holding you back can actually be a positive, and you need to try and to switch that round. So there's an element of delivering in the role that I'm in now, doing coaching to try and help me feel more confident in the role that I'm in. Then there's an element of building my brand as a director, and a lot of the things that we do as the NSTA are external facing. So being on panels and being out there and talking about the work that we do. And then obviously there's formal training that you can do through things like Institute of Directors and stuff like that to further develop yourself. And then you're in the right position for when the right opportunity comes along to take advantage of that. And I think that's the same regardless of where you are in your career. You have to be continually trying to develop yourself and use the support networks you have around you to do that.
Do you think that throughout your career you still have to continuously learn?
Definitely. I mean, I think if you look at the roles that I've done, in fact, the role I'm doing now, that arguably the disciplines that work underneath me are in the main disciplines that aren't within the skill set that I had from my degree. And I think you have to learn within your core discipline to a level. And then if you want to have that kind of broader management experience, you have to broaden that experience and understand things. If I go back to one of the reasons why I left BP to go to CNR is I wanted to understand wells. I didn't understand how wells were constructed or drilled. And one of the things that really appealed to me about the role that I had in CNR was exactly that it was much more wells based, using process engineering experience, but adapting that to learn much more about wells and deep water operations and FPSOs, floating production systems. So I think part of your journey is to continually look at where your gaps are, where you want to be, and how you can fill those gaps. And you can do that through your career choices in terms of the jobs that you do, but also through formal training or mentoring or coaching, etc.
Excellent. So I was going to ask you, what keeps you motivated when times get tough?
I think it's my family, actually. I think it's that genuine, I want to make my family proud. My wife and kids and my mum and dad and my in-laws, etc. I want to make them proud. And ultimately, I think that the organisation that I work for is there to give me every opportunity to do that. So when times are tough and we're having challenges at work, I think when I get home and sit down with the kids over dinner, I think if I can look them in the eye and think I'm doing the best I can, then that makes me want to recharge and go again the next day.
I think that's nice. It's a really nice answer, actually. I really like that. So I'm going to ask you, do you have any advice to give any new graduates wanting to come into the energy sector?
I do, actually, because I think we're in a difficult position at the moment, that externally in the wider environment, people might think that they don't want to come into the energy sector, especially the oil and gas sector. And I would challenge that. I think there are huge opportunities within the oil and gas sector, within the CCS sector, hydrogen. I think there's massive opportunities to make a real difference that's going to help support the industries that have made our lives better, but also those that are absolutely vital for the future. And I would challenge anyone who's sitting doing engineering or STEM or any subsurface degree to really seriously look at the energy sector across the whole spectrum and come and join us, because there are so many things that are exciting and interesting to get after. So that would be my advice.
And that is amazing advice as well. So I'm going to ask you maybe one final question. If you could turn back time, would you change anything?
No, I don't think so. I think you can always look with hindsight and think you could have done something differently. But I think it's much more important to recognize that life is a journey and you have to learn from your experiences. So there are good experiences that I've had and there are challenging experiences that I've had. But I think, where I've ended up is really great. And so, no, I don't think I would change anything. No, I think you have to just take each experience as it comes and learn from it.
And that is amazing advice as well, actually. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Andy for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.